We apologize. It seems the screen was not feeding from my screen, so I'm going to start over. In order to add your new tenant onto the TPN platform, under My Data on the left-hand side, you're going to click on Add a New Record. You will then choose your tenant type. So is this a lease or a levy? We are going to be loading a lease agreement. Click on Next. Step 1, choose your tenant type. So is this an individual with an RSA ID number? Is it an individual with a passport? Is it a company? Is it a trust, etc., etc.? We're going to be loading an individual with an RSA ID number. Click on Next. Enter the property details. So this is the details of the property that the tenant is renting with you. So the province from the drop down, I'm just going to select Gauteng. The type, is it apartment, is it a cottage, is it a freestanding house? Your flat name, the street number, the street name, the suburb, the city, and the postal code. If you have the landlord's details, this is an optional field. You can select, you can enter it if you'd like, and click on Next. Step 3, enter the tenant's details. So all we would need on this page is the person's name and surname, his cell phone number and email address. It is, however, important that you enter the information as accurate as possible, as this is where the notices will be sent.
Exactly, Michelle. So it is vitally important to make sure that you insert the correct addresses here. You can refer to item 1.19 on the TPN lease agreement, as this stipulates all of the service addresses decided by the tenant. So all notices and letters have to be sent to these addresses. And if you don't send the relevant notices and letters to the correct addresses, you could proceed with an entire eviction application or any kind of legal proceeding, and the court will say to you that you will have to restart, go back to the beginning, and send the letter to the correct service address. So save time and save money, just double checking, triple checking you're inserting the correct addresses.
Perfect. Then click on Next, and step 4 would be to enter the lease details. So the current state of this lease agreement, is it an active lease, is it an inactive lease? Your reference number, which you would usually get from your invoicing system. The lease type, is it a fixed term or is it a month to month? We're going to load a fixed term, excuse me. So the lease start date, the lease end date, the basic monthly rental, and then the term. So the rent is due monthly on the 1st of every month, and finish. Your tenant will then be loaded here and come up under the My Data section. On the left hand side, if you click on List Records, this will then bring all of your tenants into one central place where you can then go and update monthly on how they have paid or not paid. So for example, if you click on Unset and you click the Paid on Time button and save, the system then SMSs your tenant at no cost of his payment profile, of his payment or lack thereof. There's a few different options available here, and Rowan will actually take us through the rental payment profile ratings and their meanings.
Fantastic. So the first one we have there is POT, paid on time, and this means that payment was made on time and in full. The TPN lease says that rental has to be cleared in the landlord's account on or before the first day of the month. So if rental is paid in full and on time on this day, you will use POT, paid on time. The next block that we have there is a GP, which stands for grace period. This is when payment is made in full, but normally between the 2nd and the 7th of the month, which means obviously you've afforded the tenant a grace period to pay the rental a bit late. However, a note must be made here: a tenant does not have a legal right to a grace period. It is only to the discretion of the landlord or the property practitioner to afford the tenant such grace period. Next one we have there is the orange or yellow block. It is PL for paid late. This is that payment was made in full, but before the end of the month. So between the 1st and the end of the month, and payment was made in full. Then we have PP, the purple block, which is partial payment. This is only part of the payment was made, and there's still an outstanding amount on your invoice at the end of the month. Then our last block, the big red one, DNP, did not pay, which means that an invoice has been raised and no payment has been received throughout the entire month. Then you would use DNP for did not pay.
Okay. So Rowan, if you invoice the tenant 5,000 Rand on the 1st of September, he's made no payment during the month of September. September is obviously a did not pay.
Yeah.
Okay. But come 1st of October, he then pays you 10,000 Rand. How would you update his payments for October and September? Would September then be changed to a paid late?
No. So October would be a POT, paid on time. However, because there was no payment received for September in the month of September, you would still remain it as a DNP and not a paid late.
Perfect. That's right, because we work by our statement date.
Yes.
And we actually would advise you to contact our data team, data@tpn.co.za, and just ask them for options on how to get your data integrated with us. We actually prefer to get the information from a property management system so as to eliminate any mistakes being made while capturing payments manually. So you could perhaps look at Rentbook or any of our other options available. It is also important to get these SMSs out as early as in the month as possible to ensure you get payments. The longer you wait, the longer you're gonna wait for your money, and by the middle of the month, that money is gonna already be spent. It also encourages your tenants actually to make those payments. Now back to our non-paying tenant. So in this case, it is Joe Blogs. He's not made payment for the month, and we are going to be sending him a letter of demand. Rowan, what is the best time to get your letter of demand out?
So best time to get your letter of demand out will be the day after the rental is due. For instance, if your rent is due on the 1st of the month, you are entitled to send the letter of demand out on the 2nd, and I suggest that you do send that out at that time.
Okay. You can actually even send out the letter when you do those payment updates at the beginning of the month. So at the bottom, click on send a new letter, and then we have actually quite a few letters available to our clients. Rowan will then explain to us each of the letters and how and when to use them.
Fantastic. So the first letter we have there is the TPN welcome letter. This is just a letter that is sent out to the tenant at the beginning of your lease period that states that you are a member of TPN and just sets the tone for the lease period. Then we have a few 20 business day letters or 7-day letters, and the question often arises between help desk and legal is which letter to go for. And in order to determine that, we need to figure out when section 14 of the CPA will apply. So I have prepared a quick infographic there. So as we said earlier, this infographic will be sent to everyone who fills out the feedback forms. So just make sure that you do that, and you can have this on your fridge in your office to just help you understand where to go. Let's look through it. First step is to look at the period of your lease agreement. So if it was running on a month-to-month lease, then you don't have to worry about 20 business days. You can send out a 7-day letter of demand, because section 14 of the CPA only applies to fixed term agreements. Therefore, if your lease agreement is a fixed term lease agreement, there's one more step to do to determine if you need to do a 20 business day LOD or a 7-day LOD. And that next step is looking at your parties. So if your tenant is a juristic entity with 2 million Rand annual turnover or more, then you will use a 7-day letter of demand. However, if your tenant is a natural person or a juristic entity with less than 2 million Rand annual turnover, then section 14 of the CPA will apply, and you will have to send out a 20 business day LOD. Just a quick note there that the section 14 of the Consumer Protection Act will not apply when both parties are juristic entities. So just make sure that you follow this process very clearly in order to demand correctly and cancel your lease agreement correctly. Because if it's not done, it's an unlawful cancellation, and that can open the landlord or yourself as property practitioner up to quite a bit of liability. So those are the letters of demand that we offer. We also have a letter of cancellation or a notice to vacate. This is obviously after you've sent your LOD out and you now want to cancel the lease agreement. On a 7-day LOD, you may cancel the lease agreement on the 8th calendar day after the letter was sent, and for a 20 business day LOD, you may only cancel the lease agreement on the 21st business day after the letter was sent out and no payment has been received from the tenant. And those are the options we have for our letters on our system.
Rowan, do you then, with the notice to vacate, do you then have to give the tenant another 20 business days in order to vacate?
So no, there is no legal obligation to afford a tenant a 20 business day period to vacate the property if you have already met the requirements in terms of your letters of demand. You can request the tenant to vacate the property immediately, or it is to your discretion to afford the tenant a further time period to move out of the house, for instance, a week or a month or however long it will take. But a vital note to make here is that if you do afford them an extra time to vacate, this affords them a right of occupation, and they're entitled to stay in the property until that time, and you will not be able to institute eviction proceedings until this date has passed. So just an important note there, but you can request the tenant to vacate immediately if you have obviously followed through the requirement of sending your LOD first.
Okay, perfect. I also note that there are some registered letters available. When would our clients then make use of a registered letter of demand?
So in terms of our court procedure, it's often a registered post slip is used as proof of delivery of any notices or letters. So in the event that your tenant doesn't respond to letters, it happens very often, we get phone calls to say, I've sent all these letters out, there's been no receipt, no confirmation, no responses. That's absolutely perfect, because if you've done registered post, you use that slip to prove that the letter has been sent, and you can go ahead and get your relevant order that you're applying for. It is a bit of an additional cost, but it's so small compared to the massive cost of going all the way to court, and the judge or magistrate says to you, you need to go back to the beginning because there's no proof that the tenant received it, and go back and get your registered slip. So it is a little cost, but definitely worth it in the end. So we always recommend to select registered post and not normal post.
Perfect. Okay. So for training purposes, I will be sending a registered letter of demand. So on the right hand side, click on send. Select your tenant to send the letter to. So obviously each tenant would need to get their own letter. We're going to be sending a letter to Joe. Click on next. And now the system is going to do a little bit of a validation to help you to choose the correct letter.
That is really fantastic. So our system, with all of this training we're providing to you now, our system already helps you check if you've met everything that you need to in order to proceed with your letters of demand. So it really is a fantastic system to use, and it helps you every step along the way.
Definitely. So the term of the letter, the term of the lease, it's a fixed term lease. The landlord is a juristic person and the tenant is a natural person, and click on validate. The system then tells you, yes, you should be sending, the CPA does apply, and you should be sending a 20-day letter of demand. Your default date is what you will enter. The default date is then the date of when the money was first due. So for example, if it was for 1st of September, rent was due 1st of September, your default date will then be 1 September. The amount due, so the full amount at this stage,
so in terms of that amount due, you can demand any amount due in terms of your lease agreement. That could be the deposit amount, a monthly rental, any damages suffered by the landlord. However, one must just remember that one cannot blacklist for property damages. So that's just an important note to make there.
Then the contact person and the contact number who they should be making contact with once receiving this letter. The associated payments would need to be updated if you have not done so in the beginning of the month. And then select your delivery option. So obviously the post and SMS are mandatory fields, and you would select your address from here. Anything important to note?
So as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, it's so vitally important to make sure that you are sending your notices to the correct addresses. However, a question that we often get is a tenant is not responding to our letters. How can we prove that this has been served? So in terms of our letters and notices clause in the TPN lease agreement, this specifically deals of in the events that a letter is deemed to be received. So for instance, when you use it via email, the letter will be deemed to be received on the day that the email was sent. However, with registered post, it'll only be deemed to be received 5 business days after that letter has been sent out via registered post. So this is also important to know. It doesn't need to have a response from the tenant every time. You can use our system and our proof of delivery to rely on for your court action.
Perfect. The letters can also then be emailed to the tenant, and you can CC yourself or the landlord, and then you will click the delivery confirmation box to say that you would like this tenant or this letter to be sent to your tenant, and that you accept the charge of the letter onto your TPN account. Now, Rowan, can this amount be charged back to the tenant?
Yes, definitely. You will be able to charge the actual cost of the letter of demand as charged by TPN to your tenant's account. However, the landlord or property practitioner may not increase this amount as they deem fit unless they are a registered debt collector, which in such an event there is a specific tariff that you would need to follow.
Okay, great. Then click on send letter, and we will then bring up a copy of what, or a sample of what the TPN letter looks like, and Rowan will point out some important points that should be contained in your letter.
Fantastic. So we've just got our very basic letter over there. And on the top there, you'll see the first thing to do is that the letter is addressed to the relevant party that you are demanding from. We've entitled it their letter of demand. That's very, very clear. The next thing that you'll look at is we've referred to the agreement and the details of that agreement. Then within the first paragraph, we've got there the amount that is outstanding. So that will be the amount that you are demanding from the tenant. Next paragraph provides the time period that they have to pay the outstanding amount. And then also, which is a requirement in terms of the NCA for blacklisting, is a warning that they will be adversely listed in the event of non-payment. So our letter of demand has all of these already. There's nothing else that you need to include or add to our letter, so it's already there for you and ready to go out immediately.
Great. So then now your tenant has received his 20-day notice, and he has still not made any payment. We can now go ahead and blacklist him. But Rowan, please explain to us the counting. When do we blacklist?
Yes, so it is very, very important to make sure that you have counted your days correctly. When sending a 20 business day LOD, please do not include Saturdays, Sundays, and public holidays. You will only include the weekdays. And then for a 7-day letter of demand, you can include every day, including Saturday, Sunday, and a public holiday. And then just a note to remember is that when you start counting, don't count the first day that the letter is sent out. Only start the next day. So for instance, if you send your letter on the 2nd of the month, you will start counting your days from the 3rd. And another note to make here as well is for blacklisting, one can only blacklist if the tenant has been in arrears for 3 billing cycles. So that'll be 3 months. And that period can either be before you send the LOD or after.
Great. Okay. So click on listings, and we can see this tenant has already had a few listings done on his name. Click here to add a new blacklisting record. We then need to select all of the tenants that we would like to blacklist at this stage. So we're going to blacklist Joe and Jane. The default date, we recommend that you enter today's date. The reason for this is because the listing will only sit on his profile for a period of 12 months. Your rating, which then goes under, you can either put it under TPN or TPN and TransUnion. We suggest that you rather use that option. That way, if he even goes and tries to get a cell phone upgrade, he would be blocked and he would have to come back to you and settle that amount. So under the TPN and TransUnion, the options we advise would be final notice or hand it over. Select the tick box that you would like it to be listed on TransUnion as well. Then your full amount due at this stage minus obviously then your damages. A short reason of what transpired, just keep it factual, keep it brief. this little sentence is actually being audited back at our offices. Associated payments, you would be asked to complete these again if you have not done so earlier in the month. And then you need to take the NCA compliance declaration, which says that you have actually given the tenant the 20 business days notice before you blacklisted him, and click on Save Listing. He will then receive a notification that he has been blacklisted, and hopefully your phone should start ringing soon. That then brings us to the end of our formal training. I do, however, believe there are probably quite a few questions for us.
I'm sure, Nikki, you're going to be keeping us very busy for the next while with the questions.
We do have a lot of questions. I have a gentleman called Chris asking about how long, Tony, how long in the past may he go back and send a letter of demand for an outstanding payment? So,
okay, so I'm assuming in this one it would be a debt will prescribe after 3 years. So you can go back as far as that because that debt is still owing to you. So and then you can send out a letter of demand.
And that's regardless of if the tenant has vacated the property or not.
Absolutely.
So as long as that debt is owing to you and it's less than 3 years old, you can.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Then I've got somebody asking if they can backdate a letter of demand.
No, you cannot do that.
But you can send one now for old debt.
For old debt, absolutely.
As long as it's not older than 3 years.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect. I'm just scrolling through the comments. We've got a lot of comments.
Great.
It is great.
Hopefully they're good.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find it.
No
We've got one about sending a letter of demand. What happens if the tenant has already vacated your property? How would you know where to send the letter of demand?
So obviously in that regard, this is why we include in our lease agreement alternative addresses such as email, SMS, and we allow for that in our lease agreement to serve notices on these addresses, because very often than not, tenants do vacate, they don't go back, and sending a letter to a property that you are aware of that the tenant is no longer there is going to create huge problems for you later on. So use the email addresses, use the phone numbers, and make sure when you take on a tenant, check that number, check the email, make sure it's working so that you know that you can use those addresses to serve. Okay,
great. I've got one here from Lauren. She's saying if a tenant continually partially pays and pays late after the LOD is issued, can this tenant be given notice to vacate in terms of a material breach?
Okay, so it would just depend obviously on the specific scenario. There's a lot of variables to make understanding there. So if Lauren, if you do want to discuss your specific issue with me, you can give me a call after this or speak to TPN Legal and just pop us an email, legal@tpn.co.za. However, if a tenant is always partially paying and the full amount that is demanded has not been paid, then you can still cancel that letter of demand. So for instance, let's say you are demanding for 1,000 Rand and they pay 800 Rand. There's still 200 Rand that's outstanding and you are still entitled to cancel that letter of demand. Cancel the lease agreement. But in the event on our TPN lease agreement, we have a specific clause. It is clause 22.2, if I remember correctly, is if a tenant you are sending a letter of demand, so you've placed them in breach, and each month they are just remedying that breach, they're paying late, but you keep sending a letter of demand each time. On the third letter of demand, the one that they've remedied, you would be able to then cancel the lease agreement with 20 business days notice. So we have obviously made sure tenants can receive a letter of demand each month, pay it on the last day, and you wouldn't be able to cancel for the entire year. However, our lease agreement makes provision to cancel even in those events. Obviously, you would need 3 consecutive months and 3 consecutive breaches. But that is in the TPN lease agreement, which I haven't really seen in any other leases. So also quite good to make sure you're using ours.
Okay, Gwyneth is asking, if September is paid in full, but 30 days August is still not settled in full, do you mark September as partially paid?
I suppose it would depend what is outstanding. So the money, so again, you go via statement date. So that money will then be allocated to the previous month it will remain a did not pay. And then I suppose then your October, or excuse me, she said August.
Yes.
Your September will then also be a did not pay. But let's say he then comes and settles it, and it either is then reflected as a paid late, or he only settles it in October, he settles everything, and you see the green paid on time, you then know that everything prior to October has now been settled.
Okay, fantastic. I think if anybody's confused, they should just contact the help desk.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. We've got a few questions here about juristic entities, and it says, what happens if the tenant is juristic and the landlord is natural? Which lease agreement do they use?
This would be a juristic person lease agreement that we have as an option on our system. However, when you are dealing with the juristic entity, make sure that you have done all of your vetting before to make sure about their annual turnover. Juristic entities with less than 2 million rand annual turnover are applicable to the section 14 of the CPA, so you will need a 20 business day LOD in that regard. If it's got 2 million rand turnover or over, then you can use the 7-day letter of demand.
I think again, if not sure, rather contact
Yes,
legal
that's
and
what the TPN Legal is here for. Always just give us a call, pop us an email, and we can walk you through it.
Okay, we've got a few questions about who pays for the LOD.
Okay, so that charge can be added to your tenant's account, but it would be the specific cost of the letter. You wouldn't be able to then add additional costs or change the amount unless you are a registered debt collector, which in such an event there's a specific debt collector tariff that you need to follow.
Okay, great, thank you. Sure, we've got quite a few questions. It says, when cancelling the lease and the tenant doesn't move, I understand that no further rent can be charged. I think you addressed this in the webinar. Is that 100% correct? So
that is not correct. You will be, obviously they are liable for the rental as long as they are in occupation of the premises. However, after you've cancelled the lease, it will then be regarded as holding over damages. So when you do invoice your tenant, please make sure that you don't invoice them rental, but rather holding over damages, because they are holding over in the property and you are entitled to those damages as long as they are in occupation of the property.
Okay. And then we've got questions obviously about what would a tenant do, what would you do if a tenant doesn't want to move out after the letter to vacate?
Okay, so this is a big one that we get all the time. Please do not lock the doors. Please do not take the law into your own hands. You would have to go and institute eviction proceedings in order to get a valid court order to evict the tenant from the premises. Or alternatively, maybe you can try and just come to a mutual agreement with your tenant just to avoid legal costs. But in last place scenario, you would have to institute an eviction application against the tenant to get them out. You wouldn't be able to take the law into your own hands.
Okay. If a tenant informed you on the 1st that they can only pay in the middle of the month, do you still send a letter of demand on the 2nd?
This is completely up to you. It's in your discretion as landlord or property practitioner, but we at TPN do just recommend sending it out in any event. What happens then in this particular scenario, you get to the 15th of the month and the tenant says, sorry, I actually can't, I need 10 more days. But then you haven't done anything to secure your rights as the landlord. So we would just always suggest, if it's not in on the 1st, send it on the 2nd and deal with the excuses and stories and whatever it needs to be while that time period is running. So you're not then left 20 days into your month and the tenant says, I still haven't paid, then you have to proceed with 20 business day letter. By that time, the letter would have expired and you actually are ready to go and cancel or proceed with any court action you need.
Okay. Can you blacklist a tenant for utilities outstanding?
Yes, you can. It's only for property damages, which is an unquantifiable amount. This, in order to get, you would have to get a judgment against your tenant. It would have to go through the court process to get a judge or magistrate ordering that this is the amount of damages suffered by the landlord, and then that judgment would be loaded on the tenant's record. But other than that, you wouldn't be able to just blacklist for that amount.
Okay. Methods of sending letters of demand. We've got somebody, Charles Smith, asking about using WhatsApp to send a letter.
So it is quite risky. We don't have that in terms of our lease agreement. It's via SMS, not WhatsApp, email, registered post. But WhatsApp is a bit tricky just with regards to the laws. I would recommend sending it via WhatsApp in any event, just so that it can come to the attention of the tenant. But in terms of our lease, there isn't a clause that says you are entitled to WhatsApp the tenant. It's just an added extra just to make sure they are receiving it.
So basically send wherever you can.
Wherever you
The
can.
point here is to get your rent paid.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yes. Okay. So it says, do we need to blacklist the tenants manually, or does TPN do it automatically for us?
No, you would need to log in and go and blacklist. We obviously don't know if a payment has been received. We don't know if any arrangement was made. On the TPN dashboard, which was covered in our previous training, there is a button that we say we now think that these blacklistings are now due. And you then go in, look at those, and you go ahead with your blacklisting.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions here, phrased in different manners, about people sending letters, but the tenants are saying that they didn't receive them. You know, people have sent them via registered mail, they've then sent an email, they've sent a WhatsApp, and the tenant is still saying, I didn't get it.
Yes.
You also covered that.
What is
So-
the landlord's responsibility?
So, like we've said earlier, we've got our letters and notices clause, which stipulates and sets out when a letter will be deemed to be received. So if it is sent via email, it'll be deemed to be received on that particular day that it is sent out. There is no need for the tenant to actually come back and say, I have received this letter, I confirm the contents thereof. That's no need for that. Our registered post clause says that it'll be deemed to be received 5 business days after the registered post has been sent out. So if your tenant is not confirming letters, they're not responding, it's absolutely fine. Just make sure you are still sending out the letters and you use our particular proofs of service to go to court and get your relevant orders.
Okay, if you've blacklisted a tenant and then they come back and they fully pay all outstanding debt, can you remove the blacklisting?
It should be removed. You must remove set it as being settled.
Yes, yeah, and you can do that on the system yourself. So as soon as the payment is received, you can go and click, I think it is a little...
Yeah, there's a little flag, and when you scroll over it says settlement. So you click on that, you enter your settlement date, and that then automatically removes it.
And if that money is not paid, obviously that blacklisting remains.
Remains.
Yes,
correct.
yeah, it will remain for 12 months. And once it is removed, you cannot blacklist that person again for the same amount. So just make sure if you are settling it or removing it or whatever it is, that everything is actually, it has been paid, it has been done, or else you won't be able to re-enlist that particular tenant.
Okay, so say for example you've received payment and 30 days later it bounces out your account because the debit order was returned, you would not be able to blacklist again once you've removed that blacklisting.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But you would be able to send another letter of demand.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the payment profile would then reflect not paid, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so again, that's why the payment profile is so important, because that cannot be changed. That remains factual as in how and when he paid, and that sits on the Bureau for a period of 5 years. So even like I explained in the previous webinar as well, if you see, for example, there has been 3 months of it did not pay, you know at some point there probably was a blacklisting and it now has fallen off.
Okay. So actually the payment profile is very, very important.
It's very important.
Very vital.
Okay. So if I took a tenant to court and got a judgment, can I then also blacklist on TPN?
Yes, you would be able to send the judgment through to us and it will be loaded on via TransUnion.
So then it would pull through to all the bureaus?
All the bureaus, not just on TPN.
Okay. We've got somebody saying, I have 2 tenants that moved out owing a lot of rent. Can I still blacklist them?
Yes, yeah. But there's no requirement that says that the tenant has to be in occupation of the property or in the property to be blacklisted. As long as you've sent out a letter for for 20 business days, and there's a warning in that letter in the event of non-payment, as well as the tenant's been in arrears for 3 billing cycles. If you've met those requirements, you can blacklist.
Okay. I've got Martin asking a question. Do you blacklist after the 20 business days or after the letter of demand? So I think that...
Well, the letter of demand makes mention of the 20 business
20
days.
business days. So yeah, what I would say is you send your letter of demand, let's say on the 1st, you count your days, and after those days that you finish counting, the 21st business day, you're entitled to blacklist.
You can't just blacklist without sending a letter of demand?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I think that was partly the question. If a judgment has been obtained but the tenant has still not paid, can you send a letter of demand and blacklist thereafter?
After a judgment.
So the judgment is the highest or the worst that could happen?
But you would still be able to demand in terms of that judgment and then blacklist on if that letter of demand too.
Are you allowed to charge interest on a property as a property practitioner for utilities not paid that are over a year due?
Yes, you are, especially in terms of our lease agreement. Item 1.21 of our lease agreement states that you can charge a 2% interest on outstanding payments per month to a maximum of 24% per annum. And that's in terms of the National Credit Act. So.
Okay. We've got more things here about a tenant changing address. So if a tenant changes their email address and physical address, is the onus on them to inform the landlord that this change has happened?
Absolutely, absolutely. It will rely on them, and that is included in the agreement. And if anything has changed, they have the duty and obligation to come to the landlord and say, this is the new contact address, this is my new service address, and go that route.
Okay. So there's quite a few questions asking, they've blacklisted a tenant and it's still not paid. How else can they try and recover these outstanding fees?
So in that regard, I would suggest the next step would be legal action, to go with a summons against them for the outstanding amount, get that judgment. A judgment will obviously be held over a lot longer than a blacklisting. That's the next step to suggest there. Alternatively, maybe contacting the tenant, coming to some kind of settlement agreement, and getting those settlement terms in. That's what I would suggest in that regard.
Okay, we've got a question here saying, can I blacklist a tenant who has moved out and did not honour an agreement to pay back an arrears amount?
Yes, you can. It's another thing that it's an amount that is owed to the person. You just need to follow the relevant requirements. Blacklisting, you can go ahead.
Okay. Just a reminder to everybody that the feedback form has been posted. Please could you complete that, and we can then award CPD points. We've got a client asking about, do we have anything available to them that they can send to their tenant to make sure they know of what their obligations are?
The welcome letter.
The TPN welcome letter.
The TPN welcome letter,
yes.
yeah.
That
So
was
you
on
would
the list of
normally-
letters that you showed us.
So you would send that, normally you would just, when you first sign up a tenant, just attach it to your lease agreement. But again, a lot of our clients only come to TPN once they have this
Yes.
traveling tenant. But you can still then make use of that letter.
Yes.
Still send it out to say, I am now a member of TPN, and this is what TPN does, and your rental behavior will be monitored.
Okay, we have Veronica asking, how can she check if a tenant is already blacklisted by somebody else?
A credit check, but you would obviously need consent in order to perform a credit check.
So it would show on the rent check, right? You would need to submit data to us to...
Yeah. No, but you can still see the blacklisting on both TransUnion and Experian, whether it is done by a TPN member or by a credit provider.
Okay, great. So that's very easily just to do a credit check. How long does the blacklisting remain on the person's account?
Yeah, so it's a period of 12 months after the blacklisting has been loaded. So that's why we always say set the default date as the day that the blacklisting is being loaded. Because if you go back the 20 business days and further back when the rent became due, you're only going to have the blacklisting up there for about 10 or 11 months. So rather get the full period and it's a period of 12 months. And again, just a reminder, once that listing has expired, you will not be able to relist for that amount.
Performer Properties says, who is liable for the summons fee if the agency blacklists the tenant?
So the TPN lease agreement sets out that all legal costs are payable by the tenant in the event that the landlord has to proceed with legal action. But again, it would also help when you do any legal action, there is a cost order that will be attached to that order. And a judge and magistrate will stipulate who's going to pay. It's very normally the winning party. Don't think you would refer to anyone as a winning party, but whoever the judgment is in favor of, a cost order will go against that person as well. But for now, in terms of our lease agreement, TPN, we've set out that all legal costs are payable by the tenant. This is why you can charge the letter of demand to their specific account.
Okay, sure, we've still got more questions. That's awesome. If a tenant used their deposit as their last month's rent, can I issue a letter of demand for damages?
Yes, you may. Obviously, that's an amount that's owed to you in terms of the lease agreement. However, you will not be able to blacklist for property damages if you do use your deposit before. That's why we always recommend not to use the deposit for a last month's rental, because it does leave you completely in the lurch with any property damages that the tenant has done to your specific property.
Okay, I think I've sort of reached the end. I think if anybody else has got more questions, they just need to contact legal at TPN or our help desk.
Or help desk at TPN. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We really hope that this has been helpful. And again, like we've just said, if you have any queries, any issues, please get in touch with us. And don't forget to fill out your feedback form, and have a fantastic rest of the week.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.